Okay, welcome to episode 2 of Words That Kill. And today we have the great Andy Peloquin with us, who is the king of killing characters and ripping out readers' hearts. And so we're here to talk about character death with emotional impact. That's his specialty. And now I'm going to let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Well, with that introduction, I feel a little bit, upstage. But I guess my name's Andy Peloquin. I am a dark, epic fantasy and sci-fi author. And my first series, the Hero of Darkness series, it was written just to, like as Anita said, rip your heart out. And I had so much fun with that now that I'm rewriting it, I've actually introduced more characters just for the specific purpose of making their deaths, like doubling down on it. I don't know. I find that I get a little bit sadistic about these characters as I write them. So this is a great topic to talk about.
Okay, and that nicely leads into the first question, which is, how do you choose your victim? Do you determine it by plot, or do you specifically pick characters that are going to go on the chopping block?
So every character death has to have some sort of emotional impact for the character. I will give you an example from the book that I'm working on right now. I'm rewriting this story, the second book in the Hero of Darkness series, which will be called Darkblade series. And in the original version, there was no character that got killed. But the hunter, the main character, makes the decision to leave this particular bandit alive because he's trying to be more, heroic, or he's trying to be better. So he's like, all right, I killed all these other bandits, but I'm going to leave you alive to sort of be better. And this character comes back at the most inopportune time. But instead of killing him, I was like, all right, what would double down on the guilt of him trying to be better, and then this coming back to bite him in the ass, which is kind of what I wanted to show with this whole book, is his attempts to be heroic are just, could cause others harm. So it's this, emotional turmoil. So having this character written in for the sake of dying, it was like, okay, this character, I know exactly what they're meant to do. So my goal with them was to make it have the most emotional impact. So it turns out that, like the hunter, the character is a single father, his son is deaf, and basically this character is created to have maximum likability, so that when he dies, inevitably the hunter feels twice as much guilt as if he was just some random guy that he knew. So it's like the character was introduced for the specific purpose of making him someone with these high emotional stakes. That's sort of my approach to writing this one. Other times I've introduced characters to kill off because they provide motivation. When the character sees someone else in harm's way, he goes and he tries extra hard to stop harm from happening to them, and then they die, and it just compounds the guilt, or it compounds the feelings of helplessness. Every one of these characters is introduced with a specific purpose like that in mind.
Oh, cool. So how do you go about crafting the death scenes? How do you determine the violence levels, details, and what kind of death that they have?
I mean, the violence level is really, it's kind of whatever the scene demands. I tend to be much more violent in my writing. It kind of presents itself as I'm writing. I know the character needs to die. Sometimes I'll have an idea of how that death will take place, whatever has maximum emotional impact or visual impact, whether it's on the character or the reader. So one of the characters who I killed off in the first book, the bad guy is literally holding him up and drives the main character's dagger through his back, and it punches out his chest. That's super visually impactful, but it's also the character's own weapon that's being used to kill this guy. So it doubles the impact on the character, and then the visual of this dagger exploding and spraying blood out the front of the guy's chest. That's the kind of thing. But in other characters, it kind of comes to me as I'm writing it. I set the stage. I know what the scene is. I know who the various players are, and so I kind of just lean into the flow and say, okay, how is this going to feel most impactful as I'm writing it? Sometimes I end up changing it from the first to second draft, but oftentimes the first instinct is right.
Okay, so how do you get inside the killer's head? So does it affect you after you do it, or you just sort of go with the flow?
As in the bad guy who killed off the character that we're supposed to like?
Yeah.
Well, I usually understand what's going on in the scene before I get there. I know who the bad guy is, why they're doing what they're doing. Maybe they're doing it for the sake of driving home a point and making the main character suffer, or maybe they're just sadistic bastards who are, killing someone path of, in their way, whatever it is. I usually know what's going on before I get to that scene, so that when I get there, it's the killers don't usually tend to be too complicated to explain. By the time someone's actually willing to take up a weapon and kill someone else, everything else about them has been clearly explained, or explained clearly enough that it makes sense getting to that scene. But again, this is all like proper buildup, and this is why I think my books tend to be so long, because it takes me all that time, or I invest a lot of time, and by time I do mean words on a page, to build up to those things. So the bad guys or the characters who are doing the killing, you understand what their deal is before you get there, because I've taken 5, 10, 20,000 words beforehand to explain it.
Okay, so I know a lot of authors have trouble when they kill off their characters. They feel, that they don't want to do it. So do you have any problem with that? Because I don't myself, but I'm just curious.
I have a problem with killing off characters needlessly, but by the time I resolve to kill off a character, I know the emotional impact. And so, like, in a way, it's almost like a needful sacrifice that I'm grateful for, because it helps get the reader to this emotional state through the main character's emotional state that I want them to get to. So I'm not going to say I relish it, because that sounds a little bit cold-hearted, but I do like bringing out these visceral emotions in the characters as I'm writing them, and doing that by killing off someone that they care about. It's something that I've always not enjoyed, but it's something that I relish.
So has any character ever gotten a reprieve from you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So in my Cerberus series, I had a character introduced in one of the earlier books in the series that I always knew was going to die. And I expected to kill that character off, fairly early on in the series, because it was going to be viscerally, emotionally gut-wrenching for the main character. But then as I got to the part where this character was supposed to die, it didn't feel right for the scene. It didn't feel right for the emotional impact I wanted to have on the character. So leaving that character alive, it felt more right, because it meant that there was a little bit more, basically I could twist the dagger a little bit deeper in the character's heart, so that when that character did ultimately die later on in the series, which it was what needed to happen for this character with their specific circumstance, it had much more impact. It gave me a chance to set up their death, not only in the immediate scene to have more impact, but everything around it, like the book, both the book before and afterward. This character's death had greater impact in 3 books as opposed to just 1.
So it was a temporary reprieve.
Absolutely.
Okay, so have you ever felt bad about killing off a character?
No, because I do it needfully. I don't do it wantonly. It's not just like, this scene's boring, what could make it more fun? Well, no, let me rephrase that. I do that. I do say, what could make the scene more fun? But then, once I've decided, okay, I'm killing a character, then I think about the character and go back and flesh it out so that their deaths make more sense, so that when I actually come down to killing them, it's got that gut punch.
So has any character died unexpectedly, like you weren't really planning it, but then as you were writing it, it seemed appropriate?
Absolutely. It happens, I would say, 25% of the character deaths that occur, it just feels right as I'm writing it, and then I stop and think about why it feels right. I do plan a lot. I would say 75% of my writing is planned out. I'm a plotter for sure. But then when I'm in a scene, or when I'm writing something and it just feels right, then I'll go with it. And then once the chapter is done or the scene's done, I'll sit and think about it and say, okay, this is why I did this, or okay, if I did this, if I built it up earlier, that scene would have more impact.
Okay, yeah, I get that, because a couple of my characters have died unexpectedly too.
Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of the sort of improvisational nature of writing. Like, no matter how detailed of a plotter you are, there will always be some of this improvisation that comes up. And I would say good writers, I'm not going to claim to be a great writer, but at least good writers, they learn to trust their instincts and go with the flow, so that even if the plan deviates from where they're going, or where they're going deviates from the plan, they can adapt and adjust sort of on the fly, keep the story consistent, but make it, make it have double the impact. And that's really what these character deaths are all about. If you're killing off a character for no purpose other than, hey, let's do something different, shake things up, that's sort of the wrong reason to do it. Whereas if there's, like Ned Stark in the Game of Thrones series, his death led to massive consequences for the whole show, the whole series. And it was something totally unexpected. A death like that makes sense. Other deaths in other series that I've read, maybe they don't make as much sense. They're just done as an oh my God, what just happened moment, but they're not set up properly, or they don't have the right impact. So it's all about making sure that those deaths hit home in the right way for the right moment.
Yeah. What is the biggest body count you've ever done?
Man, that's a tough question. I know that in Darkblade Protector, the hunter kills like 70 bad guys, but none of them are really, you're not really emotionally invested to them. In the Night Guild series, I kill off at least 5 or 10 characters that people care about, and then another 40 or 50. The Silent Champions is military, so there's entire battalions being slaughtered. Or
yeah,
I've never
and we won't talk about what happens in the last book, shall we?
Exactly. So the last March, I wrote that one knowing exactly what had to happen at the end, and I had to write up to the end to make sure that each one of those deaths mattered, because all these deaths had been set up throughout the whole series. Everybody's been said, every character who's mentioned it has talked about how no one of this company survived, and so that's I think one of the hardest books I've ever written, because I knew that each one of these characters had to die at the end, as the story said. So how did I make each one of those deaths meaningful? Some of the deaths were small. Some of them maybe were off screen. Some of them were off screen, but then brought back on screen to double the impact. Like, everything had to matter. And that's where I think it took the most creativity from me, in a way, more than any other series, because I had to come up with, 70 different character deaths that had meaning.
Yeah, I was interested in that particular book because, like you said, even the readers know what's going to happen going into that particular book. And so a lot of your deaths in the other books, they're kind of a surprise or a shock almost. So no one's going to be shocked by what's going to happen in this book, because we know going in. So I was wondering how you managed to do that. That was interesting.
Well, so it's all about making, if you know they're going to die, the how or the why is what matters. So maybe a character who you expect to die heroically lives to fight another day. You think he's dead, but then it turns out that he's not. Or the character dies doing something totally out of his character. Maybe all of a sudden, in the heat of battle, he cracks and deserts, and he's running away, and he gets shot down by an enemy. So it's the how and the why that gets interesting, because we already know that they're going to die. So maybe one freezes to death because he's standing guard against the enemy, and he's so faithful to his purpose that he is willing to freeze to death, or he just doesn't move from his post. Things like that. It's these little tiny details, the nuances of their deaths, that in the end make for a much more interesting story when you've got the knowledge that every one of them is going to die. And in a way, that is kind of how I approach any death. All those nuances, or the subtle details, those are the things that drive home the impact a lot more.
So it's the psychological and the circumstance that you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Why are they dying? Why does their death matter to the main character, or why does their death not matter to the main character? That's another fun one to explore, is like, every death impacts someone. The ones who are hurt most by a death are the ones left behind. So why is a death not going to affect the people left behind? Why would someone be like, oh yeah, he's dead, who cares? That can't happen for it to be a character, to be written properly, unless there's a reason for that. Maybe the character is a total bastard and no one liked him. So you have to set all that up so that when he ultimately dies, like I think I did that in the last March, where the character's body is just like by the side of the road, dead, frozen, as he was running away. And everybody just kind of rides on by like, yep, totally deserved that. It's dealing with those it takes so much time to set these deaths up, and you don't see it until it actually happens on the screen, and then you can go back however many pages or chapters or even books and see how all of those deaths actually end up being set up beforehand in little tiny bits and pieces throughout.
Okay, so what's the strangest thing you've had to research for a death scene?
Ooh, so many weird things. I cannot think of anything offhand. I think how long it takes to suffocate in quicksand is one of them. That's probably the weirdest thing related to death. Most of the time my people just end up getting killed by, a sword or an arrow or an axe or something. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I once had to research whether someone who had their tongue cut out would actually survive.
Ooh. I had to see.
They probably won't, by the way, just in case you're wondering.
I had to see how if a person could survive having their manhood cut off. And the answer is far less certain than people think. It's just one of those things you have to research.
Yeah, I think that would probably depend on what arteries you cut in that particular circumstance. Yeah. Yeah, the same with the tongue, because it bleeds a lot. And I was setting this in the 15th century, so there would be no medical attention. So, yeah. I had to rework a whole character because I couldn't cut his tongue out.
Yeah.
But it actually worked out in the end because he ended up being a lot more integral to the plot and ended up killing someone else, which made a lot of fun. So,
and I do think that as a writer or as the person telling the story, you kind of have this instinctive, I would say maybe an intuition or just sort of this understanding of the character. And as you become more experienced as a writer telling stories, not only telling the story, but bringing these stories to completion in a single book or in a single series or over multiple series, you come to understand sort of the nature of story and characters a bit better, to where you can say, okay, this character, it's not the right time for them to die, or the situation's not right for them to die either. How can I change the situation, or how can I integrate them into the story more so that they don't die? Or you start to learn how to do that better, I would say.
Okay, so in a related question, what is the most interesting way you've killed someone?
Whew. I mean, I've tortured people to death. In my Hero of Darkness series, he goes to a place where it's just a group of torturers. They live there. They hire their services out to the whole world, and it's their stronghold. So he gets captured by them, and he sees just tons of different ways that people are being tortured, and some of them got tortured to death in some really horrible and creative ways.
Yes, I've tortured a few characters in my time, but I write horror, so torture kind of goes with the territory there.
Yeah.
So how in-depth do you go for your research?
I'm pretty deep in terms of research, but a lot of the things that I write don't necessarily require research in that sense of the word, because it's like if in the Silent Champion series as an example, I need to understand warfare, I need to understand tactics, I need to understand, the armies of it all. But when it comes to killing off a character, they've got a sword and a shield, and that's kind of it. So their deaths aren't going to be super complicated to research. Now, another thing, whether it's by poison or something with magic or something more creative, it does take more research. But really what takes the most research is just understanding the characters that I'm writing, the main character or characters, depending on how many point of view characters there are, so that I understand their psychological makeup, so that I can find a way to mess with it and torture them as much as possible with these other deaths.
Okay, so you also write a sci-fi series as well as the fantasy series. So what would you say would be the differences like between using the guns and the space toys in the sci-fi and using the swords and the knives and whatnots in the fantasy?
I'd say that fantasy tends to be much more up close and visceral in a way. Swords do a very specific type of damage, and it's far, you got to literally be within sword range. So that's maybe 6 feet if you've got long arms. Otherwise, it's you're not really going to kill them. Bow and arrow is still pretty close. An accurate longbow can only shoot a few hundred yards, and you can pretty much see someone. Whereas a sniper rifle, in my sci-fi series, the sniper rifle was accurate up to 6 kilometers out. You can bombard someone from a spaceship or toss them out into space, and you don't ever see their deaths on screen. So with sci-fi, it's a bit more detached, or at least my character was a sniper. So there's sort of this filter of the scope between him and his victims or the people he's shooting. So these deaths, it's not detached, but it is in a way detached because the character is trained as a sniper, and they kind of have to detach or dissociate their emotions from the people they're killing. Now, the people that he cared about, that died on screen, I had to make sure that he was right up close and personal, because that's where you get the maximum impact. You know, killing someone far, far away doesn't really work for a character that you want to feel the death of, unless it's like I did a sniper versus sniper battle, but then you've got that zoom where you're just right up on the character's face and you see it the moment the bullet goes through their forehead, and you know, like, so everything really, the narrowness, the focus, everything has to really zoom in, and fantasy is much more conducive to that because the combat is much closer.
Okay, great. That sounds like, I was going to say it sounds like fun, but
Yeah.
I guess you have to be an author to find that fun. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think we'll wrap it up here. And I'd like to thank you for coming on and being the guest tonight. It was great fun talking to you. So thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.